A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Empty Chair. Harper Wells stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her tiny apartment, her green eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and terror. 22 years old, and she'd never been on a real date. Not once. While her college roommates had navigated relationships with the casual confidence of seasoned veterans, Harper had buried herself in textbooks and financial reports, convinced that romance was a luxury she couldn't afford. Tonight was supposed to change everything. Her fingers trembled as she applied a subtle coat of lip gloss, the same shade she'd worn to every job interview and presentation. Safe. Professional. Boring. She smoothed down the simple navy dress she'd bought specifically for this occasion, its modest cut doing nothing to hide the nervous energy radiating from her petite frame. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection, tucking a strand of her shoulder-length brown hair behind her ear. The waves had taken her 40 minutes to perfect, and she'd watched 3 YouTube tutorials to get her makeup just right. Brad Mitchell had asked her out after their economics seminar, catching her completely off guard with his easy smile and confident demeanor. He was everything she wasn't. Socially connected, effortlessly charming, the kind of person who moved through life expecting doors to open for him. Harper still couldn't quite believe he'd noticed her, let alone wanted to spend an evening in her company. The upscale restaurant he'd chosen was a far cry from the campus coffee shops and study halls where Harper typically spent her time. Meridian's was the kind of place where business deals were made over expensive wine and carefully plated cuisine. Harper had Googled the menu 3 times, memorizing prices and pronunciation of dishes she'd never heard of. She arrived precisely on time, her practical flats clicking against the polished marble floor as she approached the hostess stand. The blonde woman behind the podium looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain, taking in Harper's department store dress and drugstore makeup. "Table for Wells," Harper said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm meeting someone. Right this way." The hostess led her through the dimly lit dining room, past tables filled with couples leaning into intimate conversations, and businessmen gesturing over contracts. Harper tried to ignore the way other diners glanced at her, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to polite disinterest. The table was perfect, tucked into a corner with soft lighting and a view of the city skyline. Harper slid into her chair, grateful that Brad had made the reservation. She never would have been able to afford a place like this on her graduate student stipend and part-time consulting salary. 7 o'clock came and went, then 7:15. Harper checked her phone for the 5th time, scrolling through her messages to make sure she had the right time and place. The waiter appeared at her elbow, refilling her water glass with professional courtesy tinged with growing sympathy. "Can I start you with something to drink while you wait?" His voice was kind but cautious, the tone reserved for customers who might be getting stood up. "Just water for now, thank you." Harper forced a smile, hyper-aware of the couple at the neighboring table who had arrived 15 minutes after her and were already sharing an appetizer. By 7:30, the whispers had started. Harper caught fragments of conversations from nearby tables, words like "poor girl" and "how embarrassing" floating through the ambient noise of clinking glasses and muted laughter. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, but she kept her shoulders straight and her expression neutral, years of maintaining composure under academic pressure serving her well. At 7:45, her phone buzzed with a text message. "Brad. Hey, something came up. Can't make it tonight. Rain check?" Harper stared at the screen, reading the words over and over as if they might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. No apology, no explanation. Just casual dismissal, as if her time, her hopes for this evening, meant nothing at all. She became aware of eyes on her, the subtle shift in atmosphere that meant people were watching her reaction. The couple next to her had stopped talking entirely, pretending to study their menus while clearly eavesdropping. At a table across the room, 2 women were whispering behind their wine glasses, occasionally glancing in her direction. Harper's chest tightened with the familiar weight of being observed, judged, found wanting. She'd spent most of her life being invisible, focusing on her studies, while others navigated the complex social dynamics she'd never quite understood. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight, she was supposed to be like everyone else, desired, worthy of someone's time and attention. Instead, she was exactly what she'd always been, alone. She gathered her purse with as much dignity as she could muster, preparing to execute the most graceful exit possible under the circumstances. Her consulting work had taught her the importance of maintaining professional composure, even in the face of disappointment. This was just another kind of presentation gone wrong, another situation that required careful management of appearances. But as she stood, her foot caught on the chair leg. Harper stumbled, her purse flying open and scattering its contents across the polished floor. Her phone skittered under a nearby table, followed by her wallet, a handful of pens, and the manila folder containing her latest economic analysis, the one she'd been planning to discuss with Brad if the conversation had turned to their shared academic interests. Papers scattered like autumn leaves, graphs and charts mixing with receipts and sticky notes. Harper dropped to her knees, scrambling to collect her belongings while acutely aware of the silence that had fallen over the nearby tables. This was worse than being stood up. This was public humiliation complete with visual aids. "Here, let me help you with that." The voice was deep, warm, with just a hint of an accent Harper couldn't place. Strong hands appeared in her peripheral vision, gathering her scattered papers with surprising care. She looked up to find herself face to face with a man who seemed to fill the space around him with quiet authority. He was tall. She could tell even with him crouched beside her, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it, and blue-gray eyes that held an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something about him that commanded attention without demanding it, a presence that drew her focus like gravity. "Thank you," Harper managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm such a mess." "You're not a mess," he said firmly, handing her the manila folder. His fingers brushed hers as she took it, and Harper felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with embarrassment, and everything to do with the magnetic pull she felt toward this stranger. "You're just having a rough evening." He'd been watching her, she realized. This man who looked like he belonged in magazines rather than rescue missions had seen her entire humiliation play out from beginning to end. The thought should have mortified her further, but something in his expression, not pity, but genuine concern, made her feel less alone. "Phoenix R," he said, rising to his full height and offering her his hand. "And you've just survived something that would have sent most people running for the nearest exit." Harper accepted his help standing, acutely aware of the warmth and strength in his grip. "Harper Wells. And I was just about to do exactly that. Run for the exit, I mean. Don't." The word was soft, but somehow carried the weight of absolute conviction. At least not on an empty stomach. Have dinner with me instead. The restaurant around them seemed to fade into background noise as Harper met his gaze, seeing something there that made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with possibility. Chapter 2. Unexpected Invitation. Harper stared at Phoenix, certain she'd misheard him. Men who looked like him, all sharp cheekbones and expensive clothing, didn't rescue clumsy graduate students from public humiliation and then invite them to dinner. They especially didn't do it when the graduate student in question had just provided entertainment for half the restaurant by spilling her entire life across the floor. "I'm sorry," she managed, clutching her manila folder against her chest like a shield. "Did you just ask me to have dinner with you?" "I did." His smile was gentle, but held an undercurrent of something more intense. "Unless you have somewhere else to be." Harper glanced around the restaurant, acutely aware that their exchange was drawing attention from nearby diners. The couple who'd witnessed her humiliation was now watching with barely concealed fascination, their own meals forgotten in favor of the drama unfolding at the next table. "I don't understand why you'd want to," she said honestly. "You don't even know me. And after what just happened, what I saw," Phoenix interrupted, his voice dropping to a tone that seemed to wrap around her like warm velvet, "was someone with more grace under pressure than most people manage on their best days. Trust me, I know something about handling disappointment in public." There was a story there, Harper realized, something in the way his expression briefly shuddered before returning to that easy confidence. She found herself curious despite her mortification, drawn to the mystery of why someone like him would be sitting alone at Meridian's on a Friday night. "I wasn't exactly graceful," Harper protested, gesturing vaguely at where her belongings had been scattered moments before. I literally fell apart in front of everyone. You kept your composure for nearly an hour, Phoenix observed. Most people would have left after 15 minutes. And when you did leave, you did it with dignity. The stumble was just bad luck. The waiter who'd been refilling Harper's water glass approached their little tableau with the carefully neutral expression of someone accustomed to unusual situations in an upscale establishment. "Mr. Cooper, your table is ready whenever you'd like to be seated." Phoenix nodded but didn't take his eyes off Harper. "Would you like to join me? I promise the conversation will be better than whatever your original date had planned." Harper felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You were watching the whole time? Hard not to notice someone waiting alone for that long." His expression grew serious, especially when that someone clearly deserved better. The simple words hit Harper with unexpected force. She'd spent so much of her life being overlooked, dismissed as too serious or too focused on her studies to be interesting. Brad's casual dismissal had felt like confirmation of every insecurity she'd ever harbored about her social awkwardness. But here was this stranger. This devastatingly attractive stranger, suggesting she deserved consideration. "I don't know," Harper hedged, uncertainty warring with a curiosity she couldn't quite suppress. "I should probably just go home, lick my wounds in private." "Or," Phoenix said, extending his arm toward the dining room, "you could salvage something good from what started as a terrible evening. Besides," he added with a slight grin that transformed his serious features, "I already ordered wine, and it's too good to waste." Against every rational instinct screaming that this was too strange, too sudden, too good to be true, Harper found herself nodding. "Okay, but I should warn you, I'm not very good at this." "At what?" "Talking to people, dating, any of it really." The admission tumbled out before she could stop it. Years of social anxiety condensing into a moment of brutal honesty. Phoenix's expression softened in a way that made something flutter in Harper's chest. "Then we're perfectly matched, because I haven't been on a real date in longer than I care to admit." He guided her toward a table in a quieter corner of the restaurant, his hand settling lightly on the small of her back. The touch was barely there, entirely proper, but Harper felt it like a brand burning through the thin fabric of her dress. There was something about his presence that made her hyper-aware of every sensation. The warmth of his palm, the subtle scent of his cologne mixing with something earthier that she couldn't identify. The table was larger than the one she'd occupied during her vigil, set for two with crisp linens and flickering candles. Phoenix pulled out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy that should have felt outdated, but somehow made Harper feel treasured instead. "So?" Phoenix said once they were seated. "Tell me about the folder you were guarding so carefully. Work or school?" Harper blinked in surprise. Most people, the few who bothered asking about her life at all, wanted to know about her major or her plans after graduation. Generic questions that led to generic answers. Nobody ever noticed the details. "Both, actually." She smoothed her hands over the manila folder, still slightly wrinkled from its encounter with the floor. "It's an economic analysis I've been working on for a consulting client. Market trends in sustainable development." Sustainable development. Phoenix leaned forward slightly, genuine interest flickering in his blue-gray eyes. "That's a field with serious potential for growth. Are you focusing on residential or commercial applications?" Harper felt her eyebrows rise. She'd expected polite disinterest, maybe a quick subject change to something more traditionally social. Instead, Phoenix was looking at her like her work actually mattered. Both, but with an emphasis on commercial real estate integration. The words came easier now, her passion for the subject overriding her social anxiety. There's a massive opportunity in retrofitting existing structures rather than just focusing on new construction. The ROI models are fascinating when you factor in long-term energy savings. "Show me," Phoenix said simply. Harper hesitated, glancing around the elegant restaurant. "Here? Now? Why not? You clearly know what you're talking about, and I'm genuinely curious." Something in his tone, not patronizing, not humoring her, but actually engaged, made Harper's decision for her. She opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of graphs and projections, spreading it carefully on the white tablecloth between them. "This is a 10-year projection for a mid-size office complex," she began, pointing to the relevant data points. Initial investment here, energy savings accumulating over time, and the break-even point at 7 years assuming current utility rates. Phoenix studied the charts with an intensity that surprised her, asking questions that demonstrated not just politeness, but genuine understanding of the financial principles involved. His queries were intelligent, probing deeper into her methodology and assumptions in ways that challenged her to defend and refine her analysis. "The variable you're not accounting for," he said after several minutes of discussion, "is regulatory changes. Tax incentives for green retrofitting are increasing at the federal level, which could push your break-even point forward significantly." Harper stared at him, her analytical mind racing through the implications. "You're right. If the proposed legislation passes, it could shave 18 months off the payback period." She looked up from her charts to find Phoenix watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "How do you know so much about this?" "I'm in real estate development," he said, with casual understatement that somehow felt like the tip of a very large iceberg. "Your analysis is impressive, Harper. Thorough, conservative in the right places, optimistic where the data supports it. Whoever you're consulting for is getting excellent value." The compliment sent warmth spreading through Harper's chest, different from the embarrassment that had plagued her earlier. This felt earned, based on her actual capabilities rather than sympathy for her situation. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot coming from someone in the industry." The waiter appeared with wine, something red and undoubtedly expensive that Phoenix must have ordered before approaching her table. He poured with practiced efficiency, leaving them alone with their conversation and the soft glow of candlelight. Phoenix raised his glass in a small toast, to salvaging terrible evenings. Harper lifted her own glass, meeting his eyes across the flickering flame between them. To unexpected kindness from strangers. The wine was smooth, warmer than anything Harper typically drank, and she felt it settle in her stomach like liquid courage. Around them, the restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and the subtle clink of silverware against china, but their corner felt separate from the rest of the world. "Can I ask you something?" Harper said, emboldened by wine and genuine curiosity. "Anything. Why did you really invite me to dinner? And don't say it was just kindness. Nobody's that altruistic." Phoenix was quiet for a long moment, considering his wine with the same intensity he'd given her economic projections. "Would you believe me if I said there was something about you that I couldn't walk away from?" Heat bloomed in Harper's cheeks, but she held his gaze. "That sounds like a line." "It does," he agreed with a rueful smile. "But it's also the truth." Chapter 3. Coffee and Rain. 3 days after dinner at Meridian's, Harper sat in her usual corner booth at Grind Coffee, surrounded by textbooks and laptop screens displaying economic models that should have held her complete attention. Instead, she found herself glancing at the door every few minutes, remembering the way Phoenix had looked at her across the candlelit table. The intensity in his blue-gray eyes when he'd said there was something about her he couldn't walk away from. She'd spent the weekend replaying every moment of their conversation, analyzing his questions about her work, with the same thoroughness she applied to market research. Phoenix Cooper wasn't just being polite when he'd engaged with her analysis. He'd understood it on a level that suggested serious expertise in commercial development. When she'd finally gotten home that night and Googled his name, the results had left her staring at her laptop screen in disbelief. Phoenix wasn't just in real estate development. He was the CEO of Cooper Holdings, a company that had transformed half the downtown skyline over the past 5 years. His net worth was listed in the hundreds of millions, and his recent projects included the sustainable mixed-use complex she'd been following in the business journals as a case study in innovative urban planning, which made his interest in a 22-year-old graduate student even more baffling. Harper forced her attention back to her regression analysis, fingers flying over the keyboard as she adjusted variables in her latest consulting project. The cafe around her buzzed with its usual Tuesday afternoon crowd, students cramming for exams, freelancers nursing single cups of coffee for hours, and the occasional business meeting conducted in hushed tones over expensive lattes. The weather had turned cold overnight, one of those sudden autumn shifts that reminded everyone winter was approaching. Rain drummed against the large windows, creating rivulets that distorted the view of the street beyond. Harper had dressed practically in dark jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that suggested she'd been working for hours without bothering to check a mirror. She was so absorbed in her calculations that she didn't notice the newcomer until a familiar voice broke through her concentration. "Is this seat taken?" Harper looked up to find Phoenix standing beside her table, rainwater darkening his hair and beading on the shoulders of his charcoal wool coat. He looked different in daylight, somehow more real and more devastating at the same time. Where the restaurant had cast him in romantic shadows, the cafe's bright lighting revealed the sharp planes of his face, the small scar above his left eyebrow, and the way his presence seemed to command attention from every person in the vicinity. Phoenix. His name escaped as barely more than a breath, and Harper felt heat rise in her cheeks as she became acutely aware of her decidedly unglamorous appearance. "What are you doing here?" "Getting coffee," he said with a slight smile, holding up a to-go cup. "Same as you, I assume. Mind if I sit? The place is packed." Harper glanced around the cafe, noting several empty tables near the windows. Phoenix's eyes followed hers, and his smile widened into something more genuine. "Okay, full disclosure, I was hoping I'd run into you. My office is 3 blocks from here, and when I saw you through the window..." He shrugged, managing to look both confident and slightly uncertain. "I thought maybe we could continue our conversation from Friday night." The admission sent a flutter of something dangerous through Harper's chest. She gestured to the empty chair across from her, trying to ignore the way several other patrons were now staring openly at their table. "Please, sit. Though I should warn you, I'm not nearly as interesting in broad daylight as I was by candlelight." Phoenix settled into the chair with fluid grace, his long legs fitting awkwardly under the small cafe table. "I'll be the judge of that." His gaze fell to her laptop screen, where complex graphs and data tables were still displayed. "What are you working on today?" "Market analysis for urban housing density optimization." The words came out automatically, but Harper caught herself before she could launch into a detailed explanation. "Sorry, that probably sounds incredibly boring to most people. Most people haven't spent the last 5 years trying to figure out how to balance affordable housing with sustainable development in urban cores," Phoenix replied, leaning forward to get a better look at her work. "Show me what you found." There was that genuine interest again. The same quality that had made Friday night feel like a conversation between equals rather than a charity dinner. Harper turned her laptop slightly so Phoenix could see the screen, hyper-aware of how his proximity made her pulse quicken. "The challenge is density versus livability," she began, pointing to a scatterplot that illustrated the relationship between population concentration and quality of life indicators. Traditional models assume that higher density automatically reduces per capita costs, but they don't account for the infrastructure strain or the psychological factors of crowding. Phoenix studied the data with the same intensity he'd shown at the restaurant, asking questions that demonstrated not just surface understanding, but deep knowledge of the practical challenges involved in large-scale development. "You're accounting for transportation logistics," he observed, tracing a trend line with his finger. "Most academic models ignore the delivery and service access issues that come with increased density." "Exactly." Harper felt her excitement building as she realized he was following her reasoning perfectly. "And the environmental impact calculations change completely when you factor in the reduction of suburban sprawl versus the increased energy consumption of high-rise living." They bent over the laptop together, Phoenix's shoulder brushing against hers as he pointed to specific data points. Harper caught his scent, something clean and masculine with an underlying note that reminded her of pine forests and crisp mountain air. It was distracting in ways that made her hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. "Your methodology here is impressive," Phoenix said, his voice closer to her ear than she'd expected. "But have you considered the psychological adaptation patterns? People adjust to higher density living over time, which affects your long-term sustainability projections." Harper turned to respond and found herself face-to-face with him, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his blue-gray eyes. For a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Neither of them moved. The cafe noise faded to background static as Harper became aware of the warmth radiating from his body, the way his gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. Then Phoenix's phone buzzed, breaking the spell. He straightened in his chair, checking the message with a frown that suggested business complications. "Problem?" Harper asked, grateful for the excuse to collect herself. Minor crisis at one of my development sites. Phoenix's expression was apologetic, but tinged with genuine regret. I need to go handle this personally. He stood, pulling on his coat while Harper tried not to feel disappointed that their impromptu meeting was ending so abruptly. Phoenix hesitated beside her table, as if debating something internally. Harper, he said finally, would you like to see the sustainable housing project we were just discussing? I mean, see it in person. I could show you around tomorrow if you're free. Harper's analytical mind immediately catalogued all the reasons this was a terrible idea. She barely knew him, despite the intensity of their two encounters. He was wealthy and powerful in ways that belonged to an entirely different social stratum than her world of student loans and part-time consulting work. And there was something about him, an undercurrent of barely restrained energy, that both attracted and unsettled her. But there was also the way he looked at her work like it mattered, the genuine respect he showed for her ideas, and the magnetic pull she felt whenever he was near. What time? She heard herself say. Phoenix's smile transformed his entire face, revealing a warmth that made Harper's chest tighten in ways she didn't entirely understand. I'll pick you up at 10. Where do you live? Harper gave him her address, watching as he entered it into his phone with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex schedules. The rain had intensified while they'd been talking, turning the street outside into a blur of gray and silver. Here, Phoenix said, pulling off his coat and draping it around Harper's shoulders before she could protest. You'll need this more than I will. The coat was warm from his body heat and carried his scent in concentrated form. Harper pulled it closer, feeling enveloped by something that was entirely him. But you'll get soaked, she protested. Phoenix's grin was quick and slightly predatory. I'll manage. Trust me. He headed for the door, moving through the crowded cafe with the same unconscious authority Harper had noticed at the restaurant. Just before he reached the exit, he turned back. Harper, wear something you can walk in. We'll be doing a lot of exploring. And then he was gone, disappearing into the rain-soaked street while Harper sat surrounded by her economic models and the lingering scent of pine forests, wondering what she'd just agreed to. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and Harper couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was just beginning. Chapter 4: Revelations and Recognition. The next morning arrived crisp and clear, the storm having washed the air clean and left everything sparkling under bright autumn sunshine. Harper stood in front of her bedroom mirror, second-guessing her outfit choice for the third time in 10 minutes. Phoenix had said to wear something she could walk in, so she'd chosen dark jeans, comfortable boots, and a fitted emerald sweater that brought out her green eyes. Simple, practical, but still feminine enough to make her feel confident. At precisely 10 o'clock, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside her modest apartment building. Harper watched from her window as Phoenix emerged from the driver's side, moving with that same fluid grace she'd noticed at the restaurant and cafe. He was dressed casually today. Dark jeans that emphasized his long legs, a charcoal Henley that stretched across his broad shoulders, and a leather jacket that suggested both wealth and a certain dangerous edge. When Harper opened her apartment door, Phoenix's smile was warm and slightly appreciative as he took in her appearance. Perfect choice, he said, his gaze lingering on her sweater. That color suits you. The compliment sent heat spiraling through Harper's chest, but she tried to play it off casually. Thanks. Ready to see some sustainable housing? More than ready. Phoenix's eyes held that same intensity she'd noticed before, as if he was seeing layers of her that she hadn't even revealed yet. I think you're going to find this project particularly interesting. The drive across town gave Harper her first real glimpse into Phoenix's world. The SUV was luxurious but understated, with leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent and technology that seemed to anticipate his needs. Phoenix navigated through traffic with easy competence, one hand on the steering wheel, while he pointed out various buildings and developments they passed. That's one of mine, he said, indicating a mixed-use complex that seamlessly blended residential and commercial space. Completed 2 years ago. We incorporated the same density optimization principles you were working on yesterday. Harper studied the building as they drove past, noting the green rooftop spaces and the way the structure seemed to flow naturally into the surrounding neighborhood rather than dominating it. The environmental integration is impressive. Most developers would have maximized square footage without considering community impact. Most developers are thinking short-term profit margins, Phoenix replied, his voice carrying a note of frustration that suggested he'd dealt with that mentality before. I prefer projects that serve the community for decades, not just the immediate bottom line. They turned into a neighborhood Harper didn't recognize, an area that seemed to be undergoing massive renovation. Construction equipment lined the streets, but rather than the chaotic disruption she expected, everything appeared carefully coordinated. Workers moved with purpose between buildings that looked nearly complete, their architecture modern but warm, designed to complement rather than overwhelm the existing residential area. Phoenix parked in front of a building that took Harper's breath away. 3 stories of sustainable materials and innovative design created a structure that seemed to grow organically from its surroundings. Solar panels were integrated so seamlessly into the roofline that they looked intentional rather than retrofitted, and the ground level featured community spaces that opened directly onto sidewalk gardens. "This is it," Phoenix said, pride evident in his voice. Phase 1 of the Riverside Commons project. 60 units of affordable housing with a waiting list 3 times that long. Harper climbed out of the SUV, her analytical mind immediately cataloging the design elements she could see from the exterior. The energy efficiency features alone must have saved your residents thousands annually. "Come see the interior," Phoenix said, his hand settling naturally at the small of her back as he guided her toward the entrance. The touch was light, casual, but Harper felt it like electricity spreading through her entire nervous system. The lobby was bright and welcoming, with natural materials and community bulletin boards that suggested this was a place where neighbors actually knew each other. Phoenix led her through a model unit that showcased innovative space utilization and energy-efficient appliances. But Harper found herself increasingly distracted by his proximity. Every time Phoenix reached around her to point out a feature, every casual brush of his fingers against hers, every moment when she caught his scent mixing with the smell of new construction, Harper felt her awareness of him intensify. There was something about the way he moved, the unconscious authority in his gestures, that spoke to parts of her she didn't entirely understand. "The heating system is entirely geothermal," Phoenix was explaining as they stood in the model kitchen. But Harper was focused on the way his voice rumbled in his chest, lower and somehow more compelling than it had been in their previous meetings. "Phoenix," she said, interrupting his explanation about energy coefficients. "Can I ask you something?" He turned to face her fully, and Harper caught her breath at the intensity in his blue-gray eyes. They were standing close in the compact kitchen space, close enough that she could see the way his pupils dilated slightly when she met his gaze. "Anything," he said, his voice dropping to that rough tone that made her pulse quicken. "Why are you really showing me this? I mean, it's incredible, and I'm grateful for the tour. But you could show this project to urban planning professors or city development committees, people who could actually help you expand it." Harper took a breath, forcing herself to voice the question that had been nagging at her since yesterday. Why does it matter what a graduate student thinks? Phoenix was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an expression she couldn't read. When he spoke, his words were careful, measured. "What if I told you that there are things about me, about the way I see the world, that most people wouldn't understand? Things that make it difficult to connect with others on more than a surface level." Harper felt a flutter of recognition, remembering her own struggles with social connection, the way her academic focus had always set her apart from her peers. "I'd say that sounds familiar. And what if I told you that when I'm around you, those things don't feel like obstacles anymore?" Phoenix stepped closer, close enough that Harper had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "What if I said that you make me want to share parts of myself I've kept hidden for years?" The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility, and something deeper that Harper couldn't name. She was acutely aware of Phoenix's proximity, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his gaze kept dropping to her lips before returning to her eyes. "I'd say that sounds too good to be true," Harper whispered. But even as she said it, she was leaning closer to him, drawn by a magnetism she couldn't resist. Phoenix's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. "Harper, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. Try me," she breathed, her heart racing as she realized how badly she wanted him to kiss her. wanted to discover what this overwhelming attraction between them might become. Phoenix's expression grew serious, almost pained. "I'm not entirely human." The words hung between them like a challenge, and Harper felt her analytical mind trying to process what he'd just said. Not entirely human. It should have sounded like a joke, or the opening line to some elaborate pickup strategy. Instead, something in Phoenix's tone, in the vulnerability behind his eyes, made her consider the possibility that he was completely serious. "What do you mean?" she asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Instead of answering with words, Phoenix took a step back and held her gaze intently. As Harper watched, his blue-gray eyes began to shift, the color deepening and brightening until they glowed with an inner light that was definitely not human. His canines seemed sharper, more pronounced, and there was something in his posture that spoke of barely contained power. Harper's breath caught, and for a moment she froze. A dozen rational thoughts raced through her mind. Hallucination, trick of the light, stress from the weak. It was absurd. It was impossible. Yet, instead of stepping away, she found herself torn between fear and fascination. Something deep inside her whispered that what she was seeing was real, and against all logic, she moved closer. How is that possible? Phoenix's eyes returned to their normal color, but the intensity remained. "I'm what you might call a werewolf, though that term doesn't really capture the reality of it. My kind has existed alongside humans for centuries, hidden in plain sight." "Werewolf," Harper repeated, testing the word. It should have sounded ridiculous, but something deep in her chest recognized the truth of it, responded to it in ways she couldn't explain. "I know how it sounds," Phoenix said, his voice rough with uncertainty. "I know what you must be thinking." Harper reached up and traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips, stopping his worried explanation. "I'm thinking," she said softly, "that this explains why I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you." Phoenix's eyes widened, and then he was kissing her, his mouth claiming hers with a hunger that stole her breath and set every nerve ending in her body on fire. Harper melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with an intensity that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Phoenix rested his forehead against hers. "Harper," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "there's one more thing you need to know. About us. About what this means." But before he could continue, Harper's phone buzzed insistently with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and felt her blood turn cold. "It's Brad," she said, looking up at Phoenix with confusion. "Why would he be calling me now?" Phoenix's expression darkened, his eyes flashing with that inhuman intensity again. When he spoke, there was something dangerous in his voice that made Harper shiver. "Don't answer it." Chapter 5. Dangerous Protection. The shift in Phoenix was immediate and startling. One moment he was the man who just kissed her, breathless, vulnerable and honest about his supernatural nature. The next, he was something else entirely, predatory and protective in equal measure, his entire body coiled with barely contained power. "Phoenix," Harper said carefully, her phone still buzzing insistently in her hand. "Why don't you want me to answer?" His jaw was clenched tight, and when he met her gaze, she caught another flash of that inhuman glow in his eyes. "Because Brad Mitchell isn't calling you out of guilty conscience or sudden romantic interest." "How could you possibly know that?" Harper asked, though something cold was beginning to unfurl in her stomach. Phoenix's certainty carried a weight that suggested knowledge rather than suspicion. Before Phoenix could respond, her phone stopped ringing, only to immediately start again. This time, Harper looked at the screen and felt her confusion deepen. The number was different. Not Brad's contact, but one she didn't recognize. Harper Wells? The voice was unfamiliar, male, with an edge that made her step instinctively closer to Phoenix. "Yes. Who is this?" "Someone who knows what you've been up to lately. Someone who knows exactly what kind of company you've been keeping." The caller's tone was simultaneously smooth and menacing. "We need to talk." Phoenix moved with inhuman speed, plucking the phone from Harper's hand before she could react. His voice, when he spoke into the device, was deadly quiet. "She has nothing to say to you." The laugh that came through the speaker was harsh and amused. Phoenix Cooper. Should have known you'd be monitoring your little pet's communications. Though I have to say, claiming a human mate is a new low. Even for you. Harper felt the world tilt sideways. Pet. Mate. The casual cruelty in the stranger's voice made something primal and furious rise in her chest, but it was the way Phoenix's entire body went rigid that truly alarmed her. Choose your next words very carefully, Phoenix said, his voice dropping to a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the air around them. Oh, I think my words have been chosen perfectly. You see, your little girlfriend's friend Brad has been very helpful in providing information about her schedule, her habits, her completely unprotected human vulnerabilities. Such a shame when werewolf politics affect innocent bystanders. The line went dead. Harper stared at Phoenix, her mind racing to process what she'd just heard. Brad's been giving someone information about me? Why would he? She stopped, the implications hitting her with sickening clarity. Phoenix's jaw tightened as he explained. They preyed on his jealousy, Harper. He envied your talent, your focus, the attention you finally gave someone other than him. They offered him money, power, promises he was too weak to resist. This is about you, about whatever werewolf politics that man mentioned. Phoenix's hands were shaking slightly. Not with fear, Harper realized, but with rage so intense it was threatening his control. When he looked at her, his eyes were fully golden now, no trace of blue-gray remaining. I need to get you somewhere safe, he said, his voice rough with the effort of maintaining human speech patterns. Now. Safe from what? Who was that? A rival pack leader who's been looking for leverage against me for months. Phoenix was already moving, guiding Harper toward the exit with urgent efficiency. Someone who apparently decided that targeting my mate would be the perfect way to force my hand. Your mate. Harper repeated the word, something deep in her chest responding to it, despite the fear and confusion swirling through her mind. Is that what I am to you? Phoenix stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression intense and almost pained. Harper, what I was trying to explain before the phone call. Werewolves don't just fall in love the way humans do. We find our destined partners, the other half of our soul. The moment I saw you in that restaurant, I knew. Knew what? That you were mine, that I was yours, that nothing in this world would ever be as important as keeping you safe and happy. His voice broke slightly on the last words. And now I've put you in danger just by being near you. Harper felt something shift inside her, a recognition that went deeper than logic or rational thought. The immediate connection she'd felt to Phoenix, the way her body responded to his presence, the sense that she'd been waiting her whole life to meet him. It all suddenly made perfect sense. But before she could respond, the sound of vehicles pulling up outside made Phoenix's head snap toward the windows. His expression darkened further. They're here, he said grimly. Harper, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Whatever happens, stay behind me. Do not try to run. Do not try to help. Can you promise me that? Harper looked out the window and felt her blood freeze. 3 black SUVs had pulled up in front of the building, and men were emerging from them with the coordinated precision of a military operation. They moved like Phoenix moved, with too much grace, too much power, predators masquerading as humans. How many of you are there? Harper whispered. More than you might think. Fewer than there used to be. Phoenix's attention was focused entirely on the approaching figures, his body positioned protectively between Harper and the windows. Harper, the promise. I promise, she said, though every instinct was screaming at her to help somehow, to not just hide behind him like a helpless victim. The building's front entrance exploded inward. Harper had never seen anything move the way the attackers did, fluid and lethal, covering ground with bounds that seemed to defy physics. But Phoenix was faster. He shifted partially, his human form blurring at the edges as bones lengthened and muscles expanded. His canines became true fangs, and his fingernails extended into claws that could rend flesh from bone. The first attacker reached them before Harper could fully process what was happening. Phoenix met him with controlled violence, his enhanced strength sending the other man crashing through a wall that had seemed solid moments before. The sound was tremendous, splintering wood and cracking plaster mixed with inhuman snarls. "The Alpha wants the girl unharmed," one of the attackers called out, his voice distorted by a partial shift that made him sound more animal than human. "Everything else is negotiable." Phoenix's response was a growl that raised every hair on Harper's body. She pressed herself against the far wall, trying to stay out of the way while watching the supernatural battle unfold before her eyes. Her mind, always analytical, was frantically trying to catalog what she was seeing. The impossible speed and strength, the way their features became lupine without completing a full transformation, the casual destruction of what had seemed like solid architecture. 2 more attackers coordinated their assault on Phoenix, trying to flank him while he dealt with the first. Harper watched in fascination and terror as Phoenix fought with a skill that suggested decades of experience. He was magnificent and terrifying, every movement efficient and deadly, but there were too many of them. A 4th attacker slipped past the main fight, his attention focused entirely on Harper. Phoenix saw him coming and roared a warning, but he was pinned down by the others, unable to break free in time. Harper found herself face to face with a man whose eyes held the same inhuman glow as Phoenix's, but where Phoenix's gold was warm and protective, these were cold and calculating. He smiled, revealing fangs that were fully extended. "Hello there, little human," he said, his voice a mockery of politeness. "Time to come meet someone very important." That's when Harper discovered something about herself she'd never suspected. Instead of cowering or freezing, something fierce and territorial surged through her. This creature was threatening her mate, invading the space where Phoenix was trying to protect her. The analytical part of her mind that had always dominated gave way to something far more primal. Harper grabbed a piece of broken lumber from the demolished wall and swung it at the attacker's head with all her strength. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms, but the satisfaction of seeing his shocked expression was worth the pain. "Touch me and die," she snarled, surprised by the venom in her own voice. The attacker recovered quickly, his amused expression turning predatory. "Oh, this one has some spirit. The Alpha is going to enjoy breaking that." But before he could reach for Harper, Phoenix arrived like a force of nature. His partially shifted form slammed into the attacker with enough force to send them both crashing through the exterior wall of the building. Harper heard the sounds of their continued battle from outside, snarls, crashes, and impacts that suggested superhuman violence. The remaining attackers seemed to reassess the situation. One of them spoke into a communication device, his words too quick and quiet for Harper to catch. Then they were retreating, moving with the same supernatural speed they'd used to attack. Phoenix reappeared through the hole in the wall, his clothes torn and bloodied, but his attention focused entirely on Harper. The partial shift was receding, leaving him human again, but still vibrating with protective energy. "Are you hurt?" His hands were on her face, her arms, checking for injuries with gentle thoroughness that contrasted sharply with the violence she'd just witnessed. "I'm fine," Harper said, though she was shaking with adrenaline and reaction. "Phoenix, what just happened? Who were those people? What did they want?" "They wanted leverage," Phoenix said grimly, pulling out his phone and dialing with urgent efficiency. "They wanted to take you to force me to give them something I can't afford to lose." Harper watched as he spoke in rapid, terse sentences to whoever had answered his call. Coordinates, threat assessments, immediate security protocols. The casual competence with which he handled the crisis suggested this wasn't his first experience with supernatural violence. When he hung up, his attention returned to her completely. "Harper, I'm going to ask something of you that isn't fair. I'm going to ask you to trust me completely, to let me protect you in ways that might seem extreme, because what just happened here isn't over. It's just the beginning." Harper looked around at the destroyed building, at the evidence of inhuman strength and speed, at the man she was falling for, who had just revealed himself to be something beyond her understanding. Everything rational told her to run, to get as far away from this dangerous world as possible. Instead, she stepped closer to Phoenix and placed her hands on his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing beneath her palms. "Tell me what you need," she said simply. The relief and gratitude in Phoenix's expression made her decision feel like the only one that mattered. Chapter 6. The Claiming. Bond. 3 days later, Harper sat in the secure penthouse that Phoenix called home, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city, while somehow making her feel completely protected from the world outside. The space was elegant but comfortable, with modern furnishings that spoke of wealth without ostentation. It felt like Phoenix himself, powerful but not showy, commanding but somehow welcoming. She'd learned more about werewolf society in the past 72 hours than she'd ever imagined possible. Phoenix's pack members had taken turns explaining the complex hierarchy, the territorial disputes, and the ancient laws that governed their kind. Harper's analytical mind had absorbed it all with the same thoroughness she applied to economic theories, but it was the emotional reality that left her reeling. She belonged to this world now, whether she'd chosen it or not. More importantly, she belonged to Phoenix in ways that went far deeper than human concepts of love or commitment. "You're thinking too hard," Phoenix said from the doorway, his voice carrying the warmth that always made something flutter in her chest. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a slate-gray shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders. But Harper had learned to read the subtle signs of tension in his posture. "Tell me about the claiming ritual," Harper said without preamble, turning to face him fully. "The real version, not the sanitized explanation your pack members gave me." Phoenix's expression grew serious as he moved to sit beside her on the leather couch, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. What it means, what it involves, what happens afterward." Harper met his gaze steadily. "And don't try to protect me from the scary parts. After what happened at the construction site, I think I've proven I can handle supernatural reality." Phoenix was quiet for a moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "The claiming ritual creates a permanent bond between mates. It's not just ceremonial. It's a magical connection that links our souls, our life forces, our very essence." "How permanent?" "Death is the only thing that breaks it," Phoenix said simply. "And even then, some believe the connection continues in whatever comes after." Harper felt something deep inside her respond to those words, a recognition that should have terrified her, but instead felt like coming home. "What does the ritual involve?" "A bite." Phoenix's eyes dropped to the curve of her neck, and Harper felt heat spiral through her at the intensity of his gaze. "Here," he said, tracing a finger along the juncture where her neck met her shoulder. "The claiming bite creates a permanent mark that tells every other supernatural being that you're mine." "And what do I get in return?" Phoenix's smile was slow and devastating. "You get to mark me as yours. The bond works both ways, Harper. I'll be as completely yours as you are mine." The thought of sinking her teeth into Phoenix's skin, of marking him permanently as hers, sent a wave of possessive heat through Harper that surprised her with its intensity. She'd never considered herself a territorial person, but something about Phoenix brought out instincts she didn't entirely understand. "What are the other effects?" Harper asked, though she was increasingly distracted by Phoenix's proximity and the way his scent seemed to wrap around her senses. "Enhanced healing for you," Phoenix said, his voice dropping to that rough tone that always made her shiver. "Heightened senses, at least temporarily. You'll be able to feel my emotions through the bond, and I'll feel yours. We'll know when the other is in danger, in pain, experiencing intense joy." That sounds overwhelming. It can be at first, but most mated pairs describe it as the most natural thing in the world once they adjust. Phoenix moved closer, his hand coming up to frame her face. "Harper, I need you to understand. If we do this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to my world, to my pack, to dangers you never asked for." Harper leaned into his touch, her decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. "I've been thinking about that, actually. About Brad and how he was being manipulated, about the rival pack and their threats. What about them? They targeted me because they thought I was weak, because they assumed I'd be a liability rather than an asset." Harper's voice grew stronger, more determined. "They were wrong. I'm not just some helpless human who needs protection. I'm smart, I'm resourceful, and I'm apparently developing some very protective instincts when it comes to you." Phoenix's eyes flashed gold at her words. "The way you swung that piece of lumber at that attacker nearly gave me a heart attack. You were supposed to stay behind me. And let him grab me while you were fighting 3 other people? I don't think so." Harper smiled at the memory of the attacker's shocked expression. "Besides, I thought you'd appreciate having a mate who can take care of herself." "I do appreciate it," Phoenix said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than you know. But Harper," she silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "Phoenix, I've spent my entire life being careful, being cautious, choosing the safe path. For once, I want to choose something because it feels right, not because it's practical. And this feels right? You feel right," Harper said simply. "Everything about this, the connection, the attraction, the way you look at me like I'm something precious, it all feels like what I've been waiting for without knowing it." Phoenix's control seemed to snap at her words. His mouth claimed hers with an urgency that left no room for doubt about his desire, and Harper melted into him with a responsiveness that surprised them both. This kiss was different from their first, hungrier, more desperate, charged with the knowledge of what they were choosing together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Phoenix rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure about this, Harper? Really sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Harper said, meaning every word. "I want to be yours, Phoenix. Completely, permanently, soul-deep yours." The golden glow in Phoenix's eyes intensified, and Harper felt answering heat spiral through her own body. "Then we do this now, before anything else can interrupt us." Phoenix stood and extended his hand to her, the gesture both courtly and primal. Harper took it without hesitation, letting him lead her to the bedroom where moonlight streamed through the windows in silver bands. "The moon helps with the ritual," Phoenix explained, his voice reverent. "Our kind has always been strongest under her light." Harper nodded, suddenly nervous not about the commitment, but about the physical reality of what they were about to do. "Will it hurt?" "For a moment," Phoenix said honestly, "but then it becomes something else entirely. The pain transforms into pleasure, into connection, into completion." He began unbuttoning his shirt with deliberate slowness, and Harper felt her breath catch at the revelation of his chest and shoulders. Phoenix was beautiful in a way that seemed almost otherworldly, all lean muscle and golden skin, with the kind of physical presence that spoke of supernatural strength held in careful check. "Your turn," Phoenix said softly, his eyes dark with desire but still patient, still giving her the chance to change her mind. Harper reached for the hem of her sweater, pulling it over her head with hands that trembled slightly. Phoenix's sharp intake of breath when she revealed the lacy bra underneath gave her confidence, and she felt beautiful under the weight of his appreciative gaze. They came together slowly, reverently, hands exploring newly revealed skin with the wonder of discovery. Phoenix's touch was gentle but sure, tracing patterns of sensation across Harper's shoulders and down her arms. When his lips followed the path blazed by his fingers, Harper felt her knees go weak with want. "Now," Phoenix said against the curve of her throat, his voice rough with need and supernatural power. "I claim you as mine, Harper Wells. My mate, my other half, my heart." His teeth sank into the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder, and Harper cried out at the initial sharp pain. But Phoenix was right. The pain lasted only a moment before transforming into something entirely different. Pleasure rolled through her in waves, accompanied by a sensation of completion so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She could feel Phoenix, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. His love for her, his fierce protectiveness, his wonder at finding her, his determination to keep her safe and happy for the rest of their lives. It was overwhelming and perfect, and exactly what she'd been missing her entire life without knowing it. When Phoenix raised his head, his eyes were blazing gold, and his mouth was stained with her blood. Harper felt no revulsion at the sight. Instead, she felt pride that she had marked him as surely as he had marked her. "My turn," she whispered, pulling his head down toward her. Harper had never bitten anyone before, but instinct guided her as she found the spot on Phoenix's neck that called to her. His groan when her teeth pierced his skin was pure pleasure, and Harper felt the bond between them intensify until she could barely tell where she ended, and he began. They were one soul in two bodies, connected by something deeper than blood or magic, or even love. They were mates in the truest sense, bound together for eternity. When Harper finally released him, They held each other close, both trembling with the magnitude of what had just occurred. The marks on their necks were already healing, but Harper could feel the permanent change in herself. The way her senses had sharpened and her awareness of Phoenix had become constant and comforting. "How do you feel?" Phoenix asked softly, his fingers tracing the claiming mark on her neck with possessive tenderness. "Complete," Harper said without hesitation. "For the first time in my life, I feel complete." Outside, the moon continued its journey across the sky, blessing the newly mated pair with silver light and ancient approval. Chapter 7. Power Couple. 2 weeks after the claiming ritual, Harper stood in the center of Phoenix's pack meeting room, surrounded by 23 werewolves who were looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. The formal introduction to the pack as their alpha's mate had been delayed by security concerns, but Phoenix had finally declared it safe enough for Harper to meet his people properly. She'd prepared for this moment like she would for any important presentation, researching pack dynamics and werewolf social structures until she could navigate the complex hierarchy with confidence. But standing here now, feeling the weight of their collective attention, Harper realized that all the research in the world couldn't have prepared her for the reality of being evaluated by supernatural beings whose enhanced senses could detect her every emotion. "Before we begin," Phoenix said from beside her, his presence both supportive and commanding, "I want to make something clear. Harper is not just my mate. She's your Luna. She has my complete trust and my complete authority to make decisions regarding this pack's welfare." A murmur rippled through the assembled werewolves. Harper caught fragments of conversation, some approving, others doubtful. Near the back, a woman with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes raised her hand. "Alpha, with all due respect, Luna Harper is human. How can she understand our needs, our nature, our vulnerabilities?" The question wasn't hostile, but it carried real concern, and Harper appreciated the directness. She stepped forward, Phoenix's hand briefly touching her back in encouragement. "You're right, Catherine," Harper said, having memorized every pack member's name and position beforehand. "I am human. I'll never understand what it feels like to shift, to hunt as a wolf, to communicate through pack bonds the way you do." Several pack members exchanged glances, clearly expecting her to defend herself differently. "But," Harper continued, her voice growing stronger, "I understand economics, resource management, strategic planning, and risk assessment. I understand how to balance multiple competing interests to find solutions that benefit everyone. And most importantly, I understand that my job isn't to be a werewolf. It's to be the best Luna I can be for this pack." She pulled out her tablet and activated the presentation she'd prepared, projecting it onto the large screen at the front of the room. "For the past 2 weeks, I've been analyzing this pack's financial structure, territorial agreements, and resource allocation. With Phoenix's permission, I've identified several areas where we can improve both our security and our prosperity." The first slide showed a detailed breakdown of the pack's current assets and expenditures. Harper watched as several faces showed surprise at her thoroughness. "Our sustainable housing project isn't just good for the community. It's a perfect cover for pack businesses, and a way to ensure our people have access to affordable, secure housing in our territory. But we're underutilizing the potential." Harper clicked to the next slide, which showed expansion possibilities and projected returns. "By establishing a development trust with profits reinvested into pack welfare, we can create a self-sustaining economic ecosystem that benefits both supernatural and human communities." Marcus, Phoenix's beta and closest advisor, leaned forward with obvious interest. "The zoning complications alone would be already researched and resolved," Harper interrupted smoothly, advancing to a slide showing regulatory pathways and legal precedents. "I've identified 3 different approaches that would allow us to expand while maintaining full legal compliance." For the next hour, Harper walked the pack through her comprehensive analysis of their current situation and her proposals for improvement. She addressed security concerns by suggesting mixed-use developments that would place pack members throughout their territory in defensible positions. She tackled resource allocation by identifying more efficient ways to fund pack operations. She even presented solutions for the ongoing territorial dispute with the rival pack that had threatened her. Rather than responding to Victor Blackwood's aggression with force, Harper explained, referring to the Alpha who had orchestrated the attack at the construction site. We isolate him economically and politically. His pack's resources come primarily from illegal enterprises, drugs, protection rackets, human trafficking. The room grew very quiet at the mention of human trafficking. Harper felt Phoenix's anger spike through their bond, but continued steadily. We can't attack those operations directly without risking exposure of werewolf society to human law enforcement. But we can make them unprofitable. I've already started working with several human law enforcement agencies, anonymously through encrypted channels, to provide them with actionable intelligence. Diana, the pack's chief scout, spoke up. You're using human law enforcement against a werewolf pack? I'm using every available resource to protect our pack and innocent humans. Harper replied firmly. Victor Blackwood threatened me because he thought I was a weakness Phoenix could be manipulated through. Instead, I'm becoming his worst nightmare. Someone who can fight him on both the human and supernatural fronts simultaneously. The pack members were exchanging looks of surprise and, Harper was pleased to note, growing respect. These were people who understood strength, and she was demonstrating that intelligence properly applied could be just as powerful as physical prowess. The human authorities will shut down Blackwood's income streams without ever knowing they're fighting werewolves, Harper continued. Meanwhile, we strengthen our own position by becoming indispensable to the human community. When Blackwood tries to move against us, he'll find himself fighting not just our pack, but every human business owner, city official, and law enforcement officer whose life we've improved. Phoenix stepped forward, pride radiating through their bond so strongly Harper felt her cheeks warm. As you can see, our Luna brings skills to this pack that complement and enhance our traditional strengths. Are there any questions about Harper's proposals? The questions came rapidly. Tactical details, financial projections, timeline concerns. Harper answered each one with the kind of thorough preparation that had earned her academic success. At first, some responses were met with skeptical silence, others with muttered doubt. Yet as she persisted, showing not just theory but practical insight, she noticed the shift. Doubt gave way to curiosity, then to respect. By the end, the pack members were beginning to see her not as Phoenix's human weakness, but as a strategic asset. When the formal meeting ended, pack members approached Harper individually. Some offered suggestions for refinements to her plans. Others shared intelligence about human political figures who might be allies. Still others simply wanted to express their approval of their Alpha's choice. Catherine, the woman who had asked the initial challenging question, was among the last to approach. Luna, she said formally, I owe you an apology. When Phoenix first told us he'd found his mate in a human, many of us worried about what that would mean for pack security. And now? Catherine smiled, the expression transforming her stern features. Now I think Victor Blackwood is the one who should be worried. After the pack members had left, Harper found herself alone with Phoenix in the meeting room. Her mate was looking at her with an expression of awe and desire that made her pulse quicken. That was incredible, Phoenix said, moving to stand behind her as she collected her presentation materials. His hands settled on her shoulders, thumbs stroking over the claiming mark that was still visible above her collar. Watching you command respect from my pack, seeing them recognize your strength and intelligence, it was one of the most attractive things I've ever witnessed. Harper leaned back against his chest, feeling his warmth and strength surround her. Through their bond, she could sense his pride, his love, and his deep satisfaction at seeing her accepted by his people. I meant what I said about fighting Blackwood on multiple fronts, Harper said. I won't let him threaten our pack or use humans as collateral damage in his power games. I know, Phoenix murmured against her ear. And that's exactly why you're perfect for this role. You're not just my mate, Harper. You're going to help me transform what it means to lead a werewolf pack in the modern world. Harper turned in his arms, meeting his intense gaze. We're going to transform it, she corrected. Together. Phoenix's kiss was fierce and proud, full of the promise of the partnership they were building. When they finally separated, Harper could see the future spreading out before them, challenging, dangerous, but filled with the kind of purpose she'd been searching for her entire life. She was no longer the abandoned graduate student sitting alone in an expensive restaurant. She was Luna of the Crescent Valley Pack, mate to the most powerful alpha in the region, and ready to prove that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't claws or fangs. It's a brilliant mind backed by unwavering determination. Outside, night was falling over their territory, and Harper could feel the pack settling into their evening routines. Through the bond, she sensed Phoenix's deep contentment at having his mate accepted by his people, his anticipation of the work they'd do together, and his absolute certainty that they could face any challenge as long as they faced it united. The war with Victor Blackwood was far from over, but Harper was no longer afraid. She had found her place, her purpose, and her perfect match. Let Blackwood try to threaten what she'd claimed. He'd discover that Aluna's protection was just as fierce as any alpha's, and twice as smart. Chapter 8. Full Circle. 1 year later, Harper Cooper stood in front of the mirror in the master bedroom of the home she now shared with Phoenix, adjusting the emerald silk dress that perfectly complemented the engagement ring sparkling on her left hand. Tonight was special for multiple reasons. It marked not only the first anniversary of the night they'd met, but also the completion of her graduate program and the launch of her expanded consulting firm that now served both human and supernatural clients. The claiming mark on her neck had long since healed into an elegant silver scar that she wore with pride, no longer bothering to hide it beneath makeup or high collars. In the supernatural community, it announced her status as a mated Luna. In the human world, those who noticed simply assumed it was a unique piece of jewelry or an artistic tattoo. "Are you ready for this?" Phoenix asked from the doorway, devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean build. The year had been good to him. The constant tension that had once tightened his features was gone, replaced by the contentment of a man who had found his perfect match. "More than ready," Harper replied, turning to face her mate. Through their bond, she could feel his excitement mixed with a deeper emotion she couldn't quite identify. "Though I still can't believe you managed to get reservations at Meridian's on such short notice." Phoenix's smile was mysterious. "I have my ways." The drive across town was filled with comfortable conversation about pack business and Harper's upcoming presentation to the City Planning Committee. Her sustainable development projects had caught the attention of municipal officials, and she was being asked to consult on a citywide initiative that would benefit both human and supernatural residents. Victor Blackwood was no longer a threat. After months of mounting tension, Phoenix and Harper confronted him directly, not just with claws and strength, but with evidence, alliances, and strategy. Cornered, outnumbered both physically and politically, Blackwood realized his empire was crumbling. Harper's strategic campaign had systematically dismantled his illegal operations, while building an unassailable network of human allies who had no idea they were protecting werewolf interests. The rival Alpha had eventually been forced to relocate his pack to another region, his influence broken, and his resources exhausted. As they pulled up to Meridian's, Harper felt a wave of nostalgia wash over her. The restaurant looked exactly the same. Elegant, expensive, intimidating to a nervous graduate student, but welcoming to the confident Luna she'd become. "Table for Cooper," Phoenix told the hostess, who smiled with the kind of deference reserved for valued regular customers. "Of course, Mr. Cooper. Right this way." Harper expected to be led to the quiet corner where they'd shared their first real conversation, but instead the hostess guided them to the center of the dining room, to a table set for two with white linens, flickering candles, and an elaborate floral arrangement that must have cost more than Harper's old monthly rent. "Phoenix," Harper said, suddenly aware that other diners were watching them with interest. "What's going on?" Instead of answering, Phoenix dropped to one knee beside her chair. Harper's breath caught as she realized what was happening. Her heart began racing, not with nerves but with overwhelming joy, as Phoenix pulled out a small velvet box that seemed to catch the candlelight and throw it back in prismatic flashes. "Harper Wells Cooper," Phoenix said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet restaurant. "1 year ago, you were sitting alone at a table not far from here, waiting for someone who didn't deserve you. I was sitting at that table over there, trying to work up the courage to approach the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen." Harper's vision blurred with tears she didn't try to hide. Around them, the restaurant had gone completely silent. Other diners caught up in the romance unfolding before them. "I knew from the moment I saw you that you were special," Phoenix continued, opening the box to reveal a ring that took Harper's breath away. The center stone was a perfect emerald surrounded by diamonds, but it was the design that made Harper gasp. Delicate Celtic knotwork that spoke of eternal bonds and unbreakable connections. I knew you were intelligent, determined, more capable than you gave yourself credit for. What I didn't know was that you would transform not just my life, but my entire understanding of what it means to lead, to love, to build something lasting and meaningful. Phoenix's eyes were blazing with that golden light Harper had come to associate with his deepest emotions. You've made me a better alpha, a better man, a better person in every way that matters. You've taken a pack that was simply surviving and helped us thrive. You've turned our territory into a model for supernatural human cooperation. Harper was crying openly now, not caring about her makeup or the attention from other diners. Through their bond, she could feel Phoenix's love, his gratitude, his absolute certainty that she was his perfect match in every possible way. Most importantly, Phoenix said softly, you've shown me what it means to be truly home, not just in a place, but with a person. You are my home, Harper, my heart, my soul, my future. He held up the ring, his hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Will you marry me? Will you let me love you and cherish you and build an extraordinary life with you for the next 50 years and beyond? Yes, Harper whispered. Then louder. Yes, of course, yes. The restaurant erupted in applause as Phoenix slipped the ring onto her finger. The perfect fit somehow not surprising given how perfectly they fit together in every other way. When he stood and kissed her, Harper felt the same electric connection that had sparked between them from their very first touch, amplified now by a year of shared experiences, challenges overcome, and love deepened. There's more, Phoenix murmured against her lips when the applause finally died down. More? Phoenix guided her back to her seat, but instead of sitting across from her, he pulled his chair around to sit beside her, close enough that their knees touched, and she could feel his warmth along her entire side. I have something else to tell you, he said, his expression shifting to something Harper recognized as barely contained excitement mixed with profound joy. Phoenix, if you're about to tell me you've planned some elaborate honeymoon that requires me to take time off from the city planning project— Harper, Phoenix interrupted gently, his hand covering hers on the table. No, I'm certain you're pregnant. I can sense it through the bond. Still, I want us to confirm it together. With a doctor, the human way. So there's no doubt. The words hit Harper like a physical blow, stopping her mid-sentence and mid-breath. What? The bond, Phoenix explained, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. I can sense it. The change in your scent. The new life growing inside you. It's been there for about a week, but I wanted to wait until tonight to tell you. Harper stared at him, her analytical mind trying to process this information, while her heart soared with a joy she hadn't expected. Pregnant. She was going to have Phoenix's child. A baby who would grow up surrounded by love and pack protection and the kind of family Harper had always dreamed of. Are you happy? Phoenix asked, and Harper could feel his uncertainty through the bond despite his outward confidence. Happy? Harper laughed, the sound bright and incredulous. Phoenix, I've gone from being a lonely graduate student with no romantic experience to being engaged to the love of my life and pregnant with our first child. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Phoenix's relief was palpable. And when he kissed her this time, Harper could taste the salt of his own emotional tears mixed with hers. Later, after they'd celebrated with champagne, sparkling cider for Harper, and an elaborate dinner, after Phoenix had called their pack to share the news and received congratulations from werewolves across the city, they found themselves back in the spot where it all began. Do you ever think about that night? Harper asked, settling into Phoenix's arms as they stood looking out at the city lights from their apartment balcony. About how different things could have been if Brad had actually shown up. Phoenix's laugh rumbled through his chest. Every day, though I have to admit I'm grateful to him for being such an ass. If he'd kept his date with you, I might never have worked up the courage to approach you. You would have found a way, Harper said with absolute certainty. Mates always find each other, right? That's what you told me. That's what I believe, Phoenix agreed, his arms tightening around her. Though I'm glad we didn't have to test that theory. Harper leaned back against his warmth, one hand resting on her still flat stomach where their child was growing, the other admiring her engagement ring as it caught the moonlight. In the distance, she could see the lights of the sustainable housing development that had started their partnership, now expanded into a network of communities that served as a model for cities across the country. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: wedding planning, preparing for parenthood, expanding their pack's influence, continuing the work of building bridges between the human and supernatural worlds. But tonight, Harper was content to simply exist in this moment of perfect happiness. She was no longer the abandoned girl who had sat alone in a restaurant, wondering what was wrong with her that made her unworthy of love. She was Luna Harper Cooper, mate to the most powerful alpha in the region, soon to be mother of his child, and architect of a better future for all the people she'd sworn to protect. As Phoenix's hand covered hers on her stomach, and the claiming mark on her neck tingled with the strength of their bond, Harper smiled into the night. Sometimes the worst evenings led to the most extraordinary beginnings,